I'd like to welcome everyone to another edition of Mad Science, White Coats Gone Wild. I'm your host, Busara, for these particular classes. And when we left off previously, I forgot to show a clip that I wanted to show that was related to Tuskegee. So I will play that clip. However, just prior to, I wanted to do a quick recap of what we went over in the first session, but I'm not going to go all the way through it. I'm going to go to, this is the main part. I just want to go back to Tuskegee, if that's all right with you all, because I just want to really highlight the sinister plot of Tuskegee and how, what is the word, bargaining with the devil or negotiating with the devil is still not productive. It's still going to end up in counterproductive measures. So we had the personnel at Tuskegee Institute agreeing to the study under one condition, and that is if they allow Tuskegee and their professionals to be involved. And they only end up assigning 2 people. Now, eventually, 10, 15 years later, when the study should have been canceled, they allowed for, let's see here, if I can put the pointer on. What was it? Yeah, about 15 years later, Black medical students began rotating through Tuskegee. So that means for 15 years, it was basically 2 Black people in the town of Tuskegee that were involved in the study, as far as basically they had no control. And being teammates on the devil's team or just having a job or having a defunct role is not enough. And we must get to a point to where we want to separate our science from their science. And it's not out of racism. It is because we must address our own problems first and take care of ourselves first. That way, Tuskegee's can't happen. I know this is from the 1930s, but this lasted for 40 years and it ended. However, there have been multiple other things that have surfaced to let us know that they are still guinea pigging us, from the crack epidemics to the music that they let us listen to. It's a lot of things that give us signs that they are traumatizing us for however many years they like to do it, and then they denounce whatever was going on years later. And all while they were doing this, 1932 is around the same time Jim Crow began. I want to say it was 1937 or 1942. It was in between that time Jim Crow began. So while you have Jim Crow brewing, festering, segregated laws popping up all over the place, KKK running amok, they're putting our people in this sick study. We have Black intellectuals negotiate with the devil to have basically devil's advocates to be the devil's advocate. And I don't blame Dr. Dibble or Nurse Rivers, because there are only 2 people. And we're talking about the devil here. I just think it is important that we do not allow history to repeat itself, or that we do not allow history to teach us that it is not in our best interest to deal with the devil. So I just want to play this quick clip of Tuskegee related information before I go further with where we're going with what happened to the Black doctor. So let's go ahead and zoom this in and
through candles and song, loved ones remember their relatives who were subject to a cruel medical experiment at the hands of the United States government.
They were never told that they had the disease.
For 40 years, starting in 1932, medical workers withheld treatment for hundreds of unsuspecting Black men infected with syphilis. The purpose? so doctors could track the ravages of the horrid illness and
There you
dissect
go.
their bodies afterward in what became known as the Tuskegee study.
And for the sake of science, they sacrificed some human beings. And it raised the question, did they really believe these men were human beings? And so we really wonder about their intention as well as their behavior.
The Associated Press exposed the study in 1972, leading to its end.
It is against everything our country stands for.
And 20 years ago this May, President Bill Clinton apologized for the U.S. government.
What the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry.
But even with an apology and a $9 million settlement, relatives of the men still struggle with the stigma of being linked to the experiment. For the first time, AP cameras were allowed in an annual gathering in Tuskegee, where descendants shared their pain and honored the victims.
My grandmother was affected, and she still had traces of syphilis in her system.
Henry Talley Jr.'s grandmother and grandfather have since died, along with every remaining participant in the study. A class action lawsuit filed in 1973 has outlived them all, and litigation continues to this day.
We owe them, not just financially, but we owe them to let people know their story.
Stories they want to keep in the public so the country never forgets. Joshua Plogel, The Associated Press.
Now, just think about what we're dealing with here. Let me get back to where I want to go. Sorry about this, everybody. So just think about this. We have a gentleman who said his grandmother was affected. She had syphilis. And again, like I said, let's say these men weren't saints who were all faithful to their wives, who weren't all, just messing with one woman. They could have spread this to multiple women, and this could have lingered well beyond and could still be lingering, because it only stopped in 1972 as stopping, but who knows how many people were impacted and how many lives were touched out of this, from this, because people from small towns go to big cities and set out on big adventures and get into sexual escapades and other things, drugs, sharing needles. I mean, just all type of things that we shouldn't have got ourselves into without questioning. And history, we can't beat up on our ancestors and those who were before us for not understanding the depths of the enemy. And I did a video about this, real short video, I want to say 10 to 15 minute video talking about the depths of the enemy. And basically, this generation going forward, the generation of those who are in the now, those who are breathing now, that's who I'm calling this generation. We have the opportunity to use our doctors, our lawyers, our engineers, our architects for the benefit of African people. That doesn't mean that that's what we're doing, but we have the opportunity to do that. And we have the proof that when we don't do that, that we can still be used against the greater good of our people. So we had Bill Clinton, who was looked at as an unofficial black man amongst the sickened black people who blindly voted for him and believed in him and his family's policies, saying he's sorry with this empty, bottomless apology, while he's creating 3-strike laws and sending younger black men to prison. So you apologizing to our elders and our ancestors while you're about to step all over their seeds and blurry and destroy the future. So it's hilarious to a point, and then it's almost sinister. It's not almost, it is sinister how they can teeter the line. Like I said this before, they can be one of the most giving nations in the world when it comes to philanthropy, while at the same time being the nation that has the most nuclear weapons, that sells the most weapons, where the citizens own the most weapons. So it's something about these Euro-Americans whose characteristics were founded on scientific racism, to where they use technology and deceit and manipulation and covertness. This covert racism of pretending like they're your friend, and really they have sinister plots up their sleeves, such as the Tuskegee study, to where they allowed men in. Just recently here, they just found out, which any person in their right mind would have known, that what is his name? Ronald Reagan was calling African diplomats monkeys. You know, so just seeing these type of things happening, and this is later on down the road, this should let you know that they are building their characteristics, their character traits, their personality off of scientific racism, and they are different when it comes to certain things. And then we must not be malicious when we plan accordingly. When we separate ourselves, we must not separate ourselves to segregate ourselves. We must separate ourselves so we can heal. We must separate ourselves so we can study those who have been basically relentlessly ravaging us intellectually, economically, educationally, and beyond. So we need to take a step back. Our separation will be a step back. It is not to cripple people economically, even though I know our separation will cause suffering among whites, but that's because, or non-blacks, not just whites, our separation will cause suffering amongst a multitude of people because we have been exploited within this system. So we are the go-to, we are the go-to bag, the go-to bunny, the bottom. So they go to us to get the money. So us stepping back would be a healing tool. And again, it was Dr. Amos Wilson who says African gains can add up to European losses. I love that quote, because our healing may hurt others, because our hurt is helping others. And this is why I'm doing this math science lecture. And again, you heard one of the gentlemen say that in the name of science, what Europeans are doing to Black people is not science, and we must reject that notion. And that's why separating from them and creating our own institutions and science practices is important, because we will think science is what Europeans is doing. Again, we'll be going to school to learn how to administer puberty blockers. I mean, we will become the Eurocentric doctor if we do not separate ourselves, because this is still the devil's house. So if we have not overthrown the devil, and the devil is still in his seat, comfortable and running his institutions, we should not want to be in those institutions wholeheartedly learning to mimic the devil. Now, if we're going there to learn what not to do, that's different. Or learn what they're doing to us, or learn what's coming up the road for us, that's different. But if that's not where we're going, and we're going to mimic them so we can get Mercedes and Beamers, then it's going to be a problem. So what happened to Black doctors? These are questions you can ask when you hear about the studies such as Tuskegee, and you're like, well, how could the government do this with Black people? So if you remember in the first session, they said we were governed by caprice, which is, they said a synonym for caprice in the dictionary, it says is hunger. So if we are hungry to be accepted within white institutions, or hungering to be hired within white institutions, or hungering to be accredited within white schools, all of the things that we do will be rooted in miseducation. Carter G. Woodson book should be a must read before any Black person wants to be a doctor, a bus driver, or a criminal. Anything you decide you want to be, you should read The Miseducation of the Negro, because it lays it out from an academic standpoint, but you can apply that to everything, because we've been miseducated at all levels on what type of criminals to be. Because even if, from a criminal aspect, if you looked at the Italian criminal versus these criminals that they have reduced our children to today, it's basically pure terrorism. That's not what the criminals do. If they're terrorizing people, it's to feed families. A lot of us aren't even feeding families. We're just terrorizing to terrorize, because that's what we've been socialized to do, because these mad scientists and the offsprings of the mad scientists and those who look up to these mad scientists as master teachers and ancestors, they are ushering our people towards being what we never were, which is what they said we were in Crania Americana, what the phrenologists believed. All of these pseudosciences and things that they said that we were brutes who rape women, and all of the things that they made up, they have slowly, through entertainment, put those directly on us. I mean, you could just think about all of the major arrests from Bill Cosby to R. Kelly to even just homosexuality. Just a lot of things have been put on to us. And this is by design. And this, who knows what the plan of this is. There has to be a grand scheme plan of things, because a lot of the work that I do, I look in the community and it's just certain areas that are forgotten about. And if Black people aren't going to do anything about them, and we're waiting for white people to come up with solutions, then it's going to, for one, I don't think it's going to ever happen. The solution won't come if we're waiting on them. And two, if they do come with the solution, who's to say it won't be a genocidal solution? Okay, so we must not be comfortable in the devil's house. So I don't want to get hung up talking about that. We want to talk about what happened to the Black doctors. And before I play this video, I just want to talk about Black doctors in just leading up to what happened to the Black doctors in their mindset, and connecting it to the caprice that they want us to be governed by. Because at some point, our doctors were not trying to be Black faces on white power or accepted by whites. If we had medicine women in the slave plantation, they weren't trying to be accredited by white institutions. They were trying to heal people. And that's the most important thing about being a doctor, is healing people, finding the right medicines, finding the right cures. It is not about being invited to circles or being invited to dinners and banquets held by racist pseudo doctors, because they're not on their P's and Q's. But they have us believing this. And it's, again, it's borderline sad. So I want to go ahead, look at some of the earlier doctors we have here, such as, and basically I'm just going to focus on Dr. Cobb, because there have been plenty of doctors, which I'm going to show you on a timeline of how there could have been even more. And Dr. Cobb was a physician, a physical anthropologist, a civil rights activist. And again, he may not have labeled himself as a civil rights activist. Those are titles that they like to throw on people. You can go to the Google right now. And matter of fact, I'm going to go to Google right now, even though this is part of a delay. I want to see if they have Malcolm X listed. You see how I got Malcolm X and Jews, you know, because the Jews didn't like Malcolm X either. They played games. They wanted to do certain things, but let's see. Malcolm X, they have him listed as an American minister. I don't remember him saying that. But let's see, and this is Wikipedia, which they like to discredit, but Wikipedia is becoming credible out here. So we have Malcolm X was an American Muslim minister and a human rights activist who was a popular figure during the civil rights movement. So they like to relate him to the civil rights movement, and he wasn't involved with the civil rights, so to speak. He was more of a person who were calling out the tactics of the civil rights. But when you're not around to tell your story, or the people who are telling your story are compromised, or the people who are telling your story are not recognized, then that's what happens. You become a civil rights activist in your death, even if you may have been against a civil rights activist. I've seen people try to associate people who were against Black Lives Matter with Black Lives Matter in their death, you know? So you gotta watch certain things and how people try to manipulate the dead and their views. But okay, it said he was a civil rights activist. Gotta stay on topic. Sorry about that, people. Civil rights activist, president of the National Medical Association in the 1960s, knew that the organization owed its very formation to racial barriers. So let me backtrack. The NMA, which is the National Medical Association, was founded by Black physicians because the AMA, which is the American Medical Association, created by the whites, refused to seat 3 African-American delegates at its annual meeting in 1870 and in 1872. So I guess they did it twice. One time the Black guys got discouraged. They didn't go the next year, and then they built up their courage 2 years later, and they came on in there and got kicked out again. So this is where I was pointing out of where hunger, the caprice of how they get, this could have been a plan to get us to, what is the word I'm looking for here? To get us to drift towards being accepted versus just healing our people. And I understand money and a lot of things play into part, and this is why the enemy is relentless. Racism, capitalism, scientific racism and capitalism, let's put it like that, are a dangerous, deadly weapon to have to duel with. And we've been dueling with it ever since we've met the European, because our whole relationship with them has been based upon scientific racism. They've even used it to, to justify our enslavement, to justify why we run away from our enslavement. They even said, like I said previously, that the free men, the free Black men, were more mentally unstable than those who were enslaved. So we have been under attack with the scientific racism ever since we've encountered them, and it's a hard battle, and it's the final boss on a video game. What is it? Battletoad. We're playing one of the Battletoad bosses, and it's impossible to beat this person. It seems like, because for one, a lot of us have to recognize we are at war and move like that. We have to stop looking for the white flag and realize that there is no white flag. Even if we're not strong enough to fight, we have to know that there is no compromise with these people. So we can't expect to be assimilating within their sciences, because they have mad sciences. So if we're assimilating within their sciences, we're gonna have mad practices. And as we go through, we're gonna see how as more doctors, the more medicine advances, the worse health gets for Black people. And it doesn't make any sense. The more we have these so-called Black people and Black intellectuals, the worse health is getting for Black people. The worse health conditions are getting, both physically and mentally. So we're talking about the physical health and the mental health. The mental health are both being deteriorated, while medicine is allegedly at its all-time breakthrough, at an all-time breakthrough when it comes to advancements. So Let me see what else we have. He also knew that black patients and doctors were often relegated to subterranean, colored, or charity wards or banned from hospitals altogether. They had been responded with their own hospitals and medical schools, at least 7 of which existed in 1909. So just think about this. In 1909, which is well over 100 years ago, our people, through racism, which again, a lot of it may not have been through racism. This may have just been bad reporting. They knew that they had to have their own schools. They knew that they needed to have their own hospitals, because a lot of the times they wouldn't even get hired unless it was their own hospitals. It says clearly here, let me get my pointer back. It says clearly here, he also knew that black patients and doctors were often relegated to subterranean, colored, or charity wards. So basically you were only in the colored only zone. White people didn't want you doctoring on them, which you should not have been a doctor to be that. That is not why whites became doctors, was not to solve the problems of black people. If you actually look at it, and we continue to go through the study, a lot of whites' doctorate degree contributed directly to the problems of Africans globally. So they didn't become doctors to help us. A lot of them created problems with their doctorate degrees for us and are still creating problems for us in their death. And so we must recognize that it didn't, a lot of things weren't bad, but it was the segregation part. So a lot of times, so they made us hunger and caprice. They bring this in. So we would have to know the black hospitals, just like any black institution to this day, is underfunded. So if you're underfunded, you have outdated medicine or not as good medicine, not as much resources, outdated facilities compared to your white counterparts. So that becomes what you want, which may not be the bad part. Like I said, all that the enemy has is not bad, but we must separate ourselves to decide what is good, what is bad. Because when we don't separate, we just see everything as better than what we have. And we think, oh, the way they raise their children is better. You know, just today, I'm shooting this is August 3rd, and August 3rd, 2019, someone just shot up a mall. And just last week, a white gentleman just shot up a garlic festival, like a festival where people come out and, I guess, either cook with garlic or sell garlic, one of the two. But these are all mass shootings conducted by white males on innocent people to an extent, because I don't believe in innocent people in guilty nations. But they're going out shooting children, women, whoever's outside. Same thing at a mall versus, let's say, the shooter, you know, some of the shooters that we may have had and recently where the persons targeted cops. Those are actual targets versus I'm going to rent a hotel room in Las Vegas and just pick people off. You know, those are different types of mental illnesses, but how by us not separating from the white man, white woman to heal and to decide what is and what isn't salvageable from their society, we're going to start shooting up randomly. We're already doing it in small multitudes in our communities, but we're going to start doing it on a larger scale, more randomly, more viciously. Elementary schools, it's inevitable, because when the white man catches a cold, we get the flu, maybe even pneumonia. But I want to continue on this here, because this is where a lot of the information is going to tie in that links the technology and the deceit that the European has, that the African must start to recognize and operate, recognizing who they're dealing with. So we have like I said, at least 7 medical schools in 1909. Well, that's saying hospitals and medical schools, at least 7, which existed in 1909. And we can probably look up today, it's not as many as we would guess. Black hospitals, I just know even in St. Louis, we had Annie Malone. She was doing things that I don't know any black male or female is doing. She was doing things a long time ago that no one is doing right now, to the point where she has a parade named after her. A lot of the buildings that she has are falling apart because something happened through the way they had us following the wrong things to where we didn't realize that we need to salvage things like the Annie Malone building and make sure that we keep that safe and we don't let that fall. And not only do we keep that safe, but we build on that. You know, if you look at Johns Hopkins or any of these white institutions, I don't know if it's Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins actually might, which one of those are black? I can find out, but you have these institutions like in St. Louis, we have Barnes Jewish Hospital, which is a hospital that's expanded. It's more than one building. It used to be on one street. Now it's all over the region. So that's what we should have done with Annie Malone or any other black. Dr. Cobb should have his own centers, but we've been too busy being ruled by caprice, trying to follow behind white institutions to be accepted and recognized by them versus separating and creating our own. And again, I know capitalism is, and scientific racism is a monster to deal with. So I'm not beating up on our ancestors for taking this path because this appeared to be the fight at the time. So again, for some reason, let's see here, 707, the AMA Commission, which is the white institution, a well-known educator, Abraham Flexner, to visit and evaluate each North American medical school. In his report, it was titled Medical Education in the United States and Canada. He raised a further hurdle for black doctors. It recommended that all but 2 black medical schools, Howard and Meharry, be closed. Unable to attract financing, the others did close, and the number of black physicians predictably fell. So, a white institution commissions a well-known educator. So we have to know he's well-educated in phrenology, well-educated in scientific racism, because this is the root of Euro-American education. And just to look exactly at who we're talking about here, Abraham Flexner. So they bring in this gentleman, Abraham Flexner, so-called gentleman, Abraham Flexner. And let me see, what do we have on Flexner? He's a child of German Jewish immigrants. So this could tie directly into the secret relationship between blacks and Jews. I don't know. I have both of the books. I may have to go through and see if his name is in it. Actually, it's 3 books, but I have volume 1 and 2. So volume 2 may have him in there. It may, 1 or 2 may have him in there. So I'm gonna go back and see, because this Jewish immigrant or a child of Jewish immigrants came to black institutions and decided that they were unfit to educate and they needed to close. Now, he wasn't gonna send his Jewish children there, and he knew whites weren't going there. The AMA weren't allowing blacks in, but they weren't oppressing Jews. So that lets you know that Jews weren't facing a plight in America like blacks were, even if there were racism in the institutions that where blacks couldn't even get in to be recognized. They were commissioning Jews to study their programs. So they would respect them enough to what would be the word, to fix their programs, because he was studying it to fix all of them. And his fix was to close the Negro schools down. That was his approach, was to close the Negro schools down, not to put more funding into them, not to send more resources to them as far as books, educators, which I don't agree with because they had mad science going on. But I agree with sending finances, but I don't agree with sending their professors, even though something needed to be done versus closing it down, which they were unable to attract the funds. And I would like to highlight that just to go back to that. So it says, unable to attract finance, and the others did close, and the number of Black physicians predictably fell. So this was around 1910. So I would assume within 5 years, this happened. Within 5 to 10 years, the schools closed, the numbers of doctors fell, and this ties directly into African-centered communities. Just to use for an example, Dr. Umar, even the amount of money he was asking for, he has still to this day not gotten it, even though he was able to acquire buildings. He asked for a certain amount, never got that. And I don't think people realize how much financing goes into these institutions. And if I can, I may have it, I can pull that up, maybe I'll go find that for another video, but financing that goes into these institutions consecutively from the alumni, just from donors. And this is how awards become named after people building dormitories, because people donate money. And we don't realize that if we're going to play the game of this system, we have to donate money to our institutions, regardless of what the science is right now. Because when the white institutions was teaching the most pseudoist sciences, they were getting the most prestigious people of the time. The video I played in the previous videos, Charles Darwin and all of these prestigious people of the time believed these things and were putting money behind the research and the books and their lectures, bringing people into town, paying for them to stay because they believed in this stuff. And we have to do that until we get to a better point. And I'm not saying our science is a pseudo. I'm saying that if you believe they're pseudo, you'll have to do that. We must do what we must do until we get to a point of liberation, because the white man is only going to confuse us. What is the Neely Fuller quote? If you don't understand racism, white supremacy, everything that you think you know will only confuse you. So if we think we know science, but we don't understand that we're in the devil's house, we're only going to know confusion science, miseducation science. We're going to be looking at the world like the European. We're going to be cutting down trees to name streets after trees, and killing animals to name streets after animals, or killing or wiping out populations of animals, and then picking one or two and putting them in the zoo and acting as if those are the animals in their natural habitat. We don't want to become that. We must separate. Not segregate, but separate. But let me go back to this Abraham Flexner, because he was brought in by racists to study everybody. And to this day, Abraham Flexner has a hospital, I want to say a hospital named after him in Louisville, Kentucky. He has a street named after him in Louisville, Kentucky. He's not looked at as being a racist. He's looked at as being an influencer, a critic, a smart man. So let's look at a couple of quotes from him. A patient had a 50-50 chance of benefiting from a physician as of 1910. Medicine was more like voodoo than science until the 20th century. Who uses voodoo? So for you to use that in one of your analogies about medicine, even though he died in, let me see, let's see, 1959, and what is it? The Tuskegee study went on for 40 years. Am I correct? Tuskegee study was still going on when he made this particular comment, or when he was alive. So I no telling at what age he made this comment. He could have made this comment in 1915, or he could have made it in 1959. But either way it goes, Tuskegee experiment was going on, or something worse was going on when he made this comment of a patient had a 50-50 chance of benefiting from a physician as of 1910. But if you're Black, you didn't have a 50-50 chance of benefiting. A lot of times you had a 0% chance because their goal was not to heal you. Their goal was to see how much pain you could endure. What was your pain threshold? That was the main goal of a lot of their studies. It wasn't to heal anyone. It was to hurt. So we have another one of his quotes. We feel strongly that the spirit characteristic of America at its noblest, above all the pursuit of higher learning, cannot admit of any condition as to personnel other than those designed to promote the objects for which this institution is established, and particularly with no regard whatever, I would think he would say, with no regard whatsoever to accidents of race, creed, or sex. So they want to, and they had this particular quote posted as if this man was a great, diverse person, but he was commissioned by a racist, and he didn't call out racism. What he called out was the Negro school need to be closed except for two, Howard and Meharry. And another one of his things that he said, another one of his quotes, this stood out to me because they had this as, again, like I said, whites rooted, they don't realize how much, and maybe they do, but I don't really think, even when they are conscious of the fact, I don't think they realize how much they are rooted in scientific racism as their fundamental characters of being American. This is why they can name streets after rapists. They can name streets after child and human traffickers. They can name streets after people who separated families. They can name schools and states after slave owners. This can only be done with people who have a foundation in scientific racism. A foundation, and to this day, they are still in power with those particular names. Those people, their ancestors, their grandchildren are still looking out for their ancestors. They still have their colleges, their schools. Harvard is still named Harvard. It was so much pseudoscience taught at Harvard, so much pseudosciences taught in some of these upper echelon so-called Ivy schools. Anytime you see a white business that says established in 1900s or 1856, they are founded on scientific racism. Still are. When you show that, and as a Black person, when you see the 1800s and you don't think about Reconstruction, Jim Crow, when you see, the disparities, the crania Americana, those things should be on your mind immediately. It should be a light bulb that goes off when you see a business that says proudly open since 1858 or 1907, when we know that we didn't have those luxuries. We didn't have those luxuries to be operating as a business unless you're talking about funeral homes or some type of chicken shack or something. But even then, it doesn't have the longevity of the 1800s or the not only do these companies that were founded in these 1800s and sometimes maybe even the 1700s, such as some of these tools, not only do they have the history of being founded, they have been advanced, they have been innovated, they have websites and multiple locations and regional centers in the East, West, North, South hemisphere. So, you know, things are changing for them for the better, while we barely have businesses that's been open since the 70s consecutively that we know of. I mean, Ebony Magazine just lost everything to the Smithsonian. So I want to stay on topic with mad science because we're in a mad world and I can go on a tangent with that. So let me stay on this mad science. So on this quote, he says, science in the very act of solving problems creates more of them. And I can't agree with him more when it comes to European pseudoscience. I just said that most people become doctors to solve the problems of others, or I mean, to help their people. So when whites are becoming doctors, it's to help whites. But we know when they become doctors and they're around blacks, it is not to help us. It's normally to create more problems. Tuskegee, Ebola, AIDS, crack, all of these things manufactured by doctors, and they are creating more problems than solutions. And a lot of times they get credit for creating solutions, but they didn't tell you that they only created solutions to problems that they created. They're not creating solutions to real organic problems that people want answers to, you know? So, and it is what it is. Like, it'd be different if they was like, we can stop volcanoes from erupting, or we could turn the temperature down on lava. They're not ready for that. Only thing they can do is solve their boo-boos, and only their little bitty small boo-boos. Any of their big hiccups, it's a wrap. It's gonna be a problem. You got stuff spilling into the ocean right now because of mad engineering. They want to drill into the ocean, which is a form of mad science. They put on them white coats and they look like they're smart. And we're going to talk about that too. We're going to talk about how they wear and tear the environment, and why separating from them is very important for our existence and our survival and our intelligence and our sanity. Because what they think is normal is not normal. And a lot of their intelligence is centered around, I keep going back to this, scientific racism and capitalism. It's not centered around common sense, logic, humanity. I mean, they like to call our ancestors barbarians and they like to call themselves civilians. But if you look at our ancestors, and if you look at those who they stole the land from, when they got the land from the natives, it was inhabitable land. They didn't stumble upon landfills, neighborhoods filled with trash and Coke bottles and beer cans and blunt wrappers. They didn't have all of that stuff around in these Native American communities. They stumbled across decent people with values who had love for the land, who even had love for the things that they slaughtered in the name of survival. Not in the name of capitalism or in the name of, because some of the stuff white people do isn't even in the name of capitalism. It's in the name of European behavior, which is bragging, the narcissism. So you have people who want to go out and kill animals for trophy pieces, not because it's a rites of passage. It's because it's a trophy. I want to kill 20 this week. Last week I killed 15. This week I'm killing 20. Hard to find deer or black rhinos or something. This is what they do, and we must realize that that is not a normal behavior. That is part of their genetic structure. So I don't want to spend too much time drifting off because, like I said, we're dealing with a mad people. So we drift off from good old Abraham Flexner, okay? And we see how he had reigned over things he had no business over. So we go back. We're still talking about Dr. Cobb. And I would advise for people, but African-centered people, to look at Dr. Cobb. And even though I don't agree with everything or maybe everything that I've read, because again, I'm reading words from others speaking for Dr. Cobb. So maybe because I don't agree with everything that I've read that they've hinted that he said, I still think people should go back and look, because this brother had an institution or an organization that he called a motel. So that means that he was in tune with something else. And that's what we needed to do. And segregation, even though it should have been separation versus segregation, segregation helped us a lot of times love ourselves more than we do now. We appreciated ourselves back then more than we do now. So in 1963, when Dr. Cobb became president of the Black organization, the National Medical Association, the National Medical Association, the United States had 5,000 Black doctors out of 227,000. Whoa, we had 5,000 Black doctors out of 227,000. I'm sorry. In the United States, we had 5,000 black doctors out of a total of almost 230,000. So it was a little under 230,000 total doctors. But only 5,000 of those almost 230,000 were Black. And although the AMA membership was often important to hospital practices, specialty training, and professional achievement, many chapters and constituent societies, medical groups that were gatekeepers to the larger organizations were closed to Blacks. And again, this is where that caprice comes in at. We're not becoming doctors to be in these gatekeeper organizations or to be in general hospitals. But I do understand that's where all of the laboratory money was being spent. So if you wanted to even try to fix sickle cell, you would think that, hey, the only way I could do it would be through getting tied in with the AMA. Because again, I go back to what I didn't really get to finish speaking on. As Blacks, we do not fund what we need to fund. Literally, too many of our ancestors and too many of our organizations go defunct or are infiltrated because they are not funded by Blacks. Okay, a lot of people want to talk about the NAACP not being a Black organization, but Black people, we must fund our own organizations. We must be willing to fund something outside of churches or ego strokes. So we'll fund our own narcissism, but we won't put 100 years worth of funding a Black organization. Okay. You know, me personally, I got my eggs in a lot of pots. I'm funding Pan-African organizations. I put money towards the NOI. I do things collectively within my community organizations, and I have my own organization. So I'm putting my eggs in a lot of pots, and I support a lot of YouTube channels and a lot of things outside of that because I know the importance of Black people doing for Black people. Because when you don't do for yourself, you'll be chasing gatekeeper organizations. And we already know what gatekeepers do, the Harvey Weinsteins. We know about gatekeepers. You'll be trying to chase the wrong things versus heal people. And you see they got these constituent societies, medical groups. Why do whites have to create groups? You know, they just can't be police officers. They have to fund Blue Lives Matter groups. And Blue Lives Matter just came up as a rebuttal to Black Lives Matter. They have always had police groups and police bars. And, you know, you have medical groups, these medical societies, and they have medical cigar bars where they hang out and lounges and these halls. So we should not get into medicine to do that. We get into medicine to heal people. And that lets you know that their science is not rooted in healing. It's rooted in witchcraft, the real voodoo, because our voodoo is spirituality. You see this spiritless Jew. So what do you call it when a Jew demeans voodoo? I mean, he literally said medicine was more like voodoo than science until the 20th century. And literally, science, this isn't science. The white man doesn't have medicine. It's poison. If you take too much of it, it will kill you. And The voodoo is, come on, our voodoo doesn't do that. Our voodoo is a spiritual system. It's not something on a medicine counter that if a child accidentally opens it up, it just, that's not voodoo. Okay, that becomes other stuff. We're talking about how they're making anything and everything that we do bad, because this culture is rooted in scientific racism. Even when you have politicians get in front of you in 2019 and they ignore Black issues wholeheartedly, it's because of scientific racism, because you can endure more pain than a Jew. You can endure more pain than a Hispanic or an immigrant. You can endure more pain, so you can be ignored. Your plight can go unchanged. It can go unaddressed. So let me see what we have here. We're still dealing with the AMA and racism, which is the American Medical Association. So how could this not be mad science? We have doctors. I mean, we know you white people don't want to heal us. Why do you have a problem with Black doctors who want to maybe heal Black people? You're already going to, in the minds of Black people, discredit voodoo, say that it's voodoo, it's a 50-50, even though y'all are 0 to 100. You got a 100% chance of getting thrown off a cliff messing with white scientists. Even in today's world, they'll tell you that, you can eat unhealthy. They'll tell you this, just in moderation. You can smoke crack in moderation. You know what I'm saying? That's basically what they're saying out here. Ain't no moderation for the devil's foods. You don't eat them at all. So let's see. They say a litany of discriminatory practices that have had a devastating effect on the health of African Americans. And again, that's not just physical health. That's mental health, because we haven't had the healing. Like I said in the first session, which if you haven't viewed it, I would advise you to go check it. The mental health, instead of these doctors bringing mental counseling to us, they would bring in the Tuskegee terrorist experiment. So we never had the right type of health practices conducted on us. And while the whites were refusing to really help us, they were also refusing to allow Blacks to come through medical schools. Or if they were allowing them to come through medical schools, they wouldn't allow for them to openly practice in hospitals, or it would only be a few hospitals they could work at. So if it's Black people in, I know in the 1900s it wasn't 50 states, but let's say if it's Black people in at least 40 states and it's only 9 institutions, it's some states without some institutions. So that means there's some Black people who are basically getting home health care. You know how you used to see the doctor going by the house, stuff like that. But that was the only option, because we couldn't really go to hospitals. So we would have to hope we have a good doctor with good sanitary practices who really cares about the people, who is not about money. And we've just been basically fed to the wolves due to the fact of scientific racism, and to act as if this isn't, which has happened less than 100 years ago, isn't still impacting us. And we still have people who are still claiming to the love of these companies that have been around for hundreds of years. How can it still not impact us? How can Levi Strauss still be around, impacting lives of people, putting money in pockets? And they were putting money in pockets back then, and we're still not being impacted from not being properly counseled, from being hurt intentionally by doctors, by being refused by doctor groups to be recognized as doctors, even with the education skills that we had. So, and these aren't the worst schools. We're talking about some prestigious institutions. So we go to, can you spare some change? They always got the Black man and woman begging for jobs, for acceptance, and it's that caprice. It comes in with the caprice. They have us marching They drifted us towards this. And it's somehow, this is a form of trickery because, to be honest, we should just realize that we have to get our money and our resources up, and we must do what we must to, I apologize here, I just drew a blank, but we must get our resources up amongst ourselves. And I'm not even going to play into the trust thing, because those are all manufactured behavior by mad scientists to make us basically wait for genocide. Because let's look at what it says. Can you spare some change? The scenes of public protests and picketing continued until 1968, when the AMA finally amended its constitution and bylaws to punish racial discrimination by permitting the expulsion of constituent societies. Pause. They can do that. So in 1968, they banned having these societies. But come on, they already exist. It's who you are. It's in your fabric. You cannot fire racism. And that's something that people need to realize. You cannot ban racism. Those are people. You know what I'm saying? Like, so these are people. Racism isn't like roaches or something, or a pest. It's not something that you can set some traps out for and come back the next morning and be like, oh, we caught the racism and we banned it. We set it outside the gate. It's gone. Racism is people. It evolves. It becomes more intricate, more intelligent. Okay? So that's all they did. They hid it. So warmer relations ensued between the medical societies, and although a 1973 effort to amalgamate them failed, they did form the lasting liaison of which W. Montague Cobb had dreamed of. Dr. Cobb. They didn't even refer to him as Dr. Cobb. Which Dr. Cobb had dreamed of. Their more fruitful joint efforts include the 1992 creation of the Minority Affairs Consortium, and in 2004, the Commission to End Healthcare Disparities. In 1994, Dr. Lonnie Bristow became the first African-American president of the AMA. Now, again, see, it's that caprice where we're governed by silly wishes and yearnings that are of no value. I wouldn't want I don't want to be the president of the KKK. I don't want to be the president of a neo-Nazi group. The AMA must be viewed the same. I don't want to be president of the United States. It is viewed the same to me. It must be viewed like that if we are being intelligent Africans. If we don't, then we will repeat history. We will go into white institutions to be white. We will put on white coats and mimic whatever white men are doing. So let's read this. Yet reminders of this rancorous history persist, and the AMA's apology remains pertinent if long overdue. So let's think of this. In 1910, I'm just going to skip through that because this is really what I put in there because it had good old Abraham in there. In 1910, when Abraham Flexner was commissioned, because they just said he published this report like he woke up writing reports. No, he was commissioned by the AMA. In 1910, when Abraham Flexner published his report on medical education, African Americans made up 2.5% of the number of physicians in the United States today. But today, and this might not be for 2019, but it says today, which will be in the 2000s. So as of recently, the numbers are less now. So you see what regression looks like? With all of those picketing signs and with all of that Minority Affairs Consortium, First Black BS, not Black First, but First Black, because we already had a Black organization with Black presidents back in the 1800s. So we don't need First Blacks. We need Black first, because you gotta have a first Black and it goes less. Because Dr. Amos Wilson said you can get more black police chiefs and the crime will go up. You can get more black politicians and political ignorance will go down. So it's not more blacks. It's getting more black first. So let me go back to this video here. Young brother. I don't want to, he's look older than me, but you know, black don't crack. This man could be 75 years old, looking 28 years old. But let's see. It caught my attention because he had a book. It was titled Black Man in a White Coat. And we got this white coats going wild segments going here. So let's let him talk about what he has experienced in his life as being a doctor.
Expectancy, heart disease, obesity, and almost every area of health outcomes, black people are more vulnerable. In the latest addition to the NewsHour bookshelf, one African-American doctor talks about what that looks like from the inside. Jeff is back with that.
Being black can be bad for your health. It's a lesson Damon Tweedy writes in his new book, Black Man in a White Coat, a doctor's reflection on race and medicine that he learned time and again in his own life and in his many years as a doctor. Tweedy is a psychiatrist at Duke University, where he also attended medical school. And welcome to you. Okay. So you start with this big subject. Is that what started it for you, that you wanted to write about?
Yeah, so, you know, race is this really highly charged political subject that we have in our society, obviously. But for me, this was a very personal story. This is really kind of about my experience and my journey. So all too often in medical school, you learn about health problems in the black community. You hear this disease is more common than this. It's always more common in black people, but you didn't really hear why. So the question of why was a huge issue for me. And there was also this big question about how my experience as a young black man was different than the experiences of other people in my class.
Well, that comes through because you're also saying that as a young doctor in training, you're saying constantly hearing about the medical frailties of black people picked at the scab of your insecurity. You did not set out thinking about medicine and race.
No, I was actually attracted to medicine. It was sort of like this, it was almost like a post-racial kind of mindset I had. Medicine to me held its appeal of being objective. You know, formulas, equations, and it was really, and that was appeal. So much of society is messy, and life is messy as a black person. So it was this appeal that it could be objective. And then when I got to medical school, I kind of got a rude awakening that it wasn't.
Well, when you refer to your insecurities, what do you mean?
You know, I come from Prince George's County, Maryland, and it was an all-black neighborhood that I grew up in, just outside of Washington, D.C. And I went to a state college, and I got to Duke. Duke's fancy private school. A lot of my classmates had parents who were doctors, and so I was really insecure about that. And as a black person, there's always this sort of thing about, is affirmative action part of why you're here, and do you really belong? And so I was grappling with all those things when I first got to medical school.
You write about a number of incidents that you witnessed in which you saw white doctors unaware of the different ways that they were treating black patients. How much in the end did you conclude that race does play a factor in the doctor's room, in the hospital room?
I think it plays a big factor, and often in ways that the doctor and the patient may not even be aware of. And so, I mean, and there are several examples I talk about in the book. And there's one example in particular that sort of comes to mind off the top of my head. This was a time when I was going to the clinic myself as a patient. So I'm coming from home, and I'm had injured my knee a few days earlier, and I'm dressed very casually in sweatpants and sweatshirt. And I come into the exam room with the doctor, and he comes in, and he never looks at me. He just looks at my knee and sort of has me stand up and down, and then says, "You're okay," and kind of was going to shuttle me away. And being a doctor, I knew that there was more that could be done or should have been done. And so I mentioned to him that I'm a doctor, and then suddenly he looks at me, and his eyes kind of light up, and he looks at my knee, he starts to talk to me, and so he really engages in this sort of doctor-patient exchange the way that it should have been from the beginning. And it was a really vivid illustration of how differently, you know, I can perceive. You know, on one hand, I could just be a young black man who's off the street somewhere, and who knows what negative assumptions he may have had because he didn't engage with me at all. And then once he realizes that I'm a doctor, it was like a totally different experience. And so I think that really illustrates how differently things can play out in the exam room.
You became a psychiatrist.
Yes.
Why?
Great question. I never thought when I went to medical school that I would go into psychiatry. But as I got towards the end of medical school, I took this one rotation just on a flyer, and I really enjoyed it. And the patients told my supervisors that I had a way of relaxing people and getting them to talk to me, and I had a way of connecting with people. And so that really made me think about psychiatry. There's also this huge issue as an African American, and the mental health in the black community is really a big deal, because often black people will be resistant to mental health care or feel like it's something that's not for them. And there's this huge sort of stigma that we often deal with. And so as a psychiatrist, I've often been one of the only few black psychiatrists. And so there's a huge deal there as well.
Well, this is something important that you've written a lot about, the dearth of black doctors generally.
Yes.
And you're pointing to that as one of the important factors of why blacks fare so poorly in the medical system. Why? Why is it important to have more black doctors?
Yeah, so African Americans make up about 13% of the population, but about 4% of physicians. And it's like mental health and psychiatry is about the same, really low numbers. And what you often see is that there's this issue of the patients don't trust the healthcare system because there's been a bad history of things that have happened in the past. And so often as a black doctor, I'm there to help sort of be a translator in a way.
So that's why we need more black doctors. At the same time, I saw recently, Association of American Medical Colleges, a new report that applications from African American men have declined
Yes, exactly.
from 1978 to recently.
Right, exactly.
Why?
Yeah, so the numbers for black women have actually increased during that time, but I think there's this bigger issue about the way society from the very top down kind of limits the horizons and the expectations of what African American men can be. And I think that really filters down. It starts from the top and it filters down to the communities. I come from that kind of community where the idea of being a doctor was sort of an alien concept. And it was only I had the good fortune of having an older brother who had gone to college and then being I tested into a program that really a magnet program that really set me on that path. But there are all too many young black men who don't have those opportunities, and there's talent being squandered. And so I think that's the big factor.
I know this is a sort of personal memoir for you.
Sure.
Have you thought about larger questions of policy type questions of what should be done either in the medical profession or the wider society?
Sure, and in the book I talk about some of those. I talk about the Affordable Care Act and the way it's helped and the way it's been undercut by sort of the politics of all of it. I also talk about ways in which doctors and patients can sort of be educated to have a better relationship. And because I think that's the huge issue in my book is about the doctor and patient relationship. And when that's frayed, that really makes a huge impact on patients. And ultimately, the way our society is set up, often black people are the ones who are facing the biggest consequence of that.
All right, the new book is Black Man in a White Coat, Dr. Damon Tweedy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Yo. All right, everyone. So that was a real good video. I actually enjoyed that brother. He was seemed pretty fair spoken there, and he was basically flat out saying what he experienced. And he went to the doctor, white doctor, treated him just like nothing, so to speak, and he told him he was a doctor, and he changed, his persona. And that should let you know what we're dealing with here and how whites can pass those feelings along to black doctors on how to interact with black people. Because if we're going to white institutions who don't have the best interest of black people in mind, even if it's not consciously, which it may be, but if it's a subconscious disinterest for the well-being of black people, then they're going to subconsciously or consciously pass that along to any and all students who come through their institutions. And we must start recognizing that it's certain things that we've been, that have been normalized to us through this society because of capitalism. So we allow any and everybody to touch our food. Those are things that have been normalized through capitalism. But from a holistic or even from a health point of view, up until recently, I would just say in the past 100 years, prior to us just wholeheartedly jumping into mad science, we didn't allow people we didn't love or people we didn't know or have a personal relationship to touch our food. The same thing would be like that, would go for medicine. So if you're, say, in a tribal setting or even in just a small communal setting, everyone would know the doctor. The doctor would know everyone. Even the teachers would know all of the students, because if the teacher is old enough, she taught your parents. The doctor delivered your father. There should be some type of camaraderie or unity among the community, amongst the most important, sacred, tedious things of life, such as food. Food is very tedious, the growing of it, the cooking of it. having any and everybody touching your food, if you have mentally ill people touching your food, you know, just recently they showed people licking ice cream and licking the tacos, you know. Now the woman who licked the ice cream, she didn't sell your food, but just ice cream sitting out, you don't know who made it. That's not normal. You know, back in the day when ice cream was originated, even though it's not healthy, ice cream was made by your grandmother or somebody you knew, or your granddaddy or your mother, your father would make the ice cream, and the people knew who made it. It wasn't made in some far distant land. That is something of capitalism. The same would go for medicine. So we're having doctors and pharmaceutical labs concoct miracle cures, and we don't even meet them. You know, how can you make a cure for me and you didn't meet me? It's going to fit everybody. And that's why they have all these symptoms, because they're not for you. They're just made for money. And it may work for you, but it may not. But just in case, take these with this symptom list or side effect list. That's what it is, the side effects. So I don't want to get caught on this one. Go to our next video, next slide, because that pretty much we're coming to the end of this particular section of the lecture. But I mean, just to continue the thought of removing ourselves from the capitalistic society where money rules everything, not morality, but money, not values, but valuables. So when that happens, normally the intellects may be ignorant, as you see with your phrenologists, the crania americana, even the Tuskegee study. These were people who went to school, who would walk in a room amongst people who were illiterate, such as our people who were fresh from slavery in the Tuskegee study, and they would sound smart. And yeah, they may sound smarter than our people who may only had a third grade education, if that back then. They may have sounded smarter, knew more words, but they were our people who weren't as literate, weren't as sinister. So literacy and being a sinister are two different things. So you could be illiterate with a kind heart, know few words, and be a loving, kind soul. You just was abused by people who made you ignorant. But you could know all the words in the world because you're using those words to form technology. So we go to this humble apology. Let's see. I think this was in 2008. What is they called? The AMA, the white organization. That's what they must be recognized as. I don't care how many black people they admit in. Just like if the KKK, which I heard the rumors of, they were allowing Mexicans and blacks in, they will historically be a white power, so-called power, terrorist group. I don't care how many blacks they can have. Bixby, the black Bixby guy as the leader, and it still is a white terrorist group. Same for the AMA. They are a white doctor society. And it is, let's listen to this apology because it was so sincere, and it definitely changed a lot of lives, and it's gonna change your life when I'm done reading it. I guarantee you, you're gonna feel so warm and fuzzy on the inside. And it is here where I humbly come to the physicians of today's National Medical Association to tell you that we are sorry. Let's see. I'm sorry. And it is here where I humbly come to the physicians of today's National Medical Association to tell you that we are sorry. AMA past presidents, Dr. John C. Nelson in 2004, and I myself in 2006, expressed our own personal apologies to this august body. But today, on behalf of the American Medical Association, I unequivocally apologize for our past behavior. We pledge to do everything in our power to right the wrongs that were done by our organization to African American physicians and their families and their patients. So yes, this history is still being written. The subtitle of my commentary in the JAMA was Contrition, Reconciliation, and Collaboration. We've expressed our heartfelt contrition, and I hope that we can continue down a path toward stronger and stronger collaboration and partnership. 1 week ago, the New York Sun published an editorial about the AMA apology. It noted that the AMA's expression of regret is the culmination of rigorous introspection that are those who say that apologies can't change the past, and they have a point. The hope is that they can change the future. No, they just want to change the future because the past isn't predicated on the future. Matter of fact, let's see if I can find. Let's see here, just for a quick diversion here because we don't got that much left in the slide. AMA. We're gonna go to the American Medical Society. American Medical Association. That's their name. American Medical Association. Let's see what they don't have a logo. That's their logo, AMA. The American founded in 1847 and incorporated in 1897. So they still holding on to their scientific racism roots. So their foundation is scientific racism, hatred, and when you go right to them, they didn't say, you don't see anything about racism or anything on this first title. First thing you see is the American Medical Association, founded in 1847, incorporated in 1897. It's the largest association of physicians, both MDs and DOs, and medical students in the United States. The AMA mission is to promote the art and science of medicine and the betterment of public health. But since 1847, they were denying Black people and could still tie directly into the poor health habits, practices, and future habits of Black people, eating habits. A lot of these things, the trust habits we have is tied directly into the scientific racism foundation of the AMA. And you go to their stuff today in 2019, and you still see that, for one, they're not letting you know that they're the devil, which let you know they still dealing in technology. And for two, that they are hiding. I mean, they just hiding it. That's all that matters. They don't know too. For one, they are hiding their hand, but I'm telling you who they are. And never forget that that's a white organization who is directly linked to the bad health of Black men and women, whether it's syphilis, eating habits. All of these things are directly tied into the American Medical Association, who was founded during the Civil Rights era and founded on racism, stood strong on racism. And that apology that I just read was basically only released in 2008, which is what, a little over 11 years ago, a little over 10 years ago. It was only released. The apology was only released. Oh, let me adjust my camera here. The apology was only released because this report by JAMA, I guess some joint effort where they, looked at the racism and the divide. So they did a detailed report. So I would advise anybody to go look up the JAMA African American report. So JAMA, I guess that's how, I don't know if that's an acronym, which it looks like it is because it's all capital, but go look that up and you'll see the apology and the date of the report and what they found, which was basically regression, not progression, but regression. The numbers was dropping as far as Black men, without a doubt. Now, it's definitely going to be more black women because it was more gender, oppression in the late 1800s, early 1900s, even for white women. But now there's something going on with the scientific racism where the black man has been pushed out of there and his numbers are dropping. So we go back to this again, and I just said that African Americans make up 12.3% of the U.S. population in 2006, but in 2006, only 2.2 of the physicians and medical students, as compared to 2.5 in 1910. And this is with racism. And again, Flexner, Abraham Flexner, the Jew, the small hat, whose dad made small hats. He made this report, and it's bigger than what you may believe. And when you go research him, they'll have him as this great, diverse, white educator. And actually, he is directly linked to the bad health of African Americans to this day. So we have 1.8% of the AMA members in 2006. So we went from picketing to get members in to being 1.8% of the members in 2006. So that number could have went up a little bit over the past 10 years. But come on now. How much could these numbers have fluctuated? And this is what I can find as far as the latest numbers from the latest report, because if the whites were smart, they wouldn't keep doing these reports. They would publish the report in 2006 and buried it, because if you want to hide something from a black man, where do you put it? Do you put it on a basketball court, or do you put it in a book? So I want to go to the just a brief timeline before we get out of this here. Just a couple more before we lead up, because the main purpose of this is to set up the true math science. We haven't even made it to the true math science. Part one was a prerequisite. This here is giving you a history of direct conflict, but I don't even know if we want to call it conflict, direct terrorism from white coats on black folks. So this is the detailed, direct conflict, white folks going at us. So we have, in 1846, the NMA is proposed at a national meeting on the medical education. So they end up naming it the white organization. So let's see, that's on their organization renamed the American Medical Studies, officially founded in Philadelphia. So in 1850, Daniel Lane Jr., Martin Delaney, Isaac H. Snowden, and I'm putting a highlight, let me go back to this. We're putting a highlight on a master teacher here, Martin Delaney. We're gonna put the pointer right there. So we have Martin Delaney, are the first known African Americans admitted to Harvard Medical School. The first. Let's go ahead and give them a round of applause for being the first in 1850. Within the school started in 1850. So fall 1850, they in school. However, some prominent American, again, they listed him as a prominent American because he was, a cracker cracking that whip. Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. expels the trio in March 1851. So by the second semester, they suspended them boys on spring break. Don't come back after spring break. And why were they suspended? Was it because they was out there smoking weed? I mean, rap music wasn't out, so they weren't listening to loud music. What was the reason to where, because, white people just create excuses. It wasn't no loud, provocative music they was listening to. It wasn't because they was smoking weed. Their pants wasn't sagging. So what could they have been expelled for in 1851? Because bowing to pressure by some of its white students, not white teachers or white adults. We're talking about white children. Two groups of white medical students signed petitions protesting the exclusion of these three black people. So they seen these three black people because you got to remember, we're talking about crania americana. a people whose whole psyche is built upon racism. The Americas was founded upon scientific racism. There was black people enslaved when they said all men were created equal and free and all of this other stuff, while they went home and raped slaves and broke up families and did what they did to the black family. They seen the white family as completely different from the black family, because that's their scientific racism foundation. That's the only way it can work. You know, Dr. DeGroosh, she likes to use the cognitive dissonance. I love that. But we also have to recognize the scientific racism being the foundation of the American intellect, the foundation of the American character, the American. It is the American. When you say American, you also saying scientific racism. So when you saying scientific racism, is also saying American. Apple pie, America, scientific racism. So those things go hand in hand. What is it? Capitalism, wasteful habits, over-sexualization. These things go hand in hand with America. And it's a foundation that they must have. In 1906, AMA published its first volume of the American Medical Directory, which lists all physicians in the U.S. African-American physicians, and they weren't called African-Americans then. You got to remember, African-Americans was a term, I think, invented by Jesse Jackson here just recently. And we don't even respect Jesse Jackson now. So we have African-American physicians were abbreviated as COL after their names to indicate that they are colored. They didn't say anybody else. They didn't say the Asians. They didn't say, they said, you know, we were colored. So you have to recognize that they just went out of their way just to make sure that you know that these are black people. Don't use them. Don't put money in their pocket. So it's just a further thing to demean us. And this is why I don't get mad at the ancestors, because this is how they were duped into caprice, the hunger. Because when you know you got these stigmas on you. You even heard the doctor from the previous video I just played say he went into Duke University. And again, this man was born recently. At most, he's a baby boomer. I don't even think he's that. I just don't want to say he's too young to sound ignorant. But at most, he's a baby boomer. And he's saying he's going into college with these feelings of inferiority based off of he don't want to feel like he's there off of affirmative action. And so what if you're there off affirmative action? The ancestors fought for that. That's well deserved. However, they need for us to have these feelings and these doubts and it's all ties into the scientific racism of us being lazy and dumb. It ties directly into those definitions. But I just wanted to tie, before we end this, I just wanted to show Martin Delaney. Again, it shows here, first student admitted into Harvard Medical School, and he wasn't expelled, and he was expelled within his first full year. Didn't even make it through his full year. Let's look at what type of man Martin Delaney was. For one, he wasn't an African American, and I'm not calling any black person an abolitionist due to the fact of what I've been coming across in my research of abolitionists and what they thought of Africans being liberated, truly. So I'm going to call him a Pan-African. They call him a journalist, a physician, a soldier, and a writer, and arguably the first proponent of black nationalism, which is not a character trait of an abolitionist. So he's looked at as one of the first proponents of black nationalism, and Delaney is credited with the Pan-African slogan of Africa for the Africans. Huh? Did he say he was credited for saying, equality, we just trying to be equal? Huh? No, Africans for the Africans. So Africa for the Africans. So we look at this man and what greatness he had. And Harvard, one of the most alleged prestigious schools, Ivy League schools ever, did admit this man in. So just imagine what they could have robbed us with. And again, this could have saved us because they practiced pseudosciences. So only thing they would have taught him was miseducation. Only thing they would have taught him was phrenology and skull sizes and told him to read Crania Americana, and he would have probably came out a confused Negro, even though all blacks are confused to some extent because we are in the devil's house and we are just trying to maintain and love our wives and love our husbands, you know, the straight couples. That's what I'm talking about. Love our families. And in the midst of that, you know, we got to roll with these punches of capitalism and the foundation of scientific racism being the main character of the Euro-American that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And by scientific racism being the foundation of this society, when immigrants come over, whether they're Chinese, whether they're Bosnian or Arabs, they inherit these same foundational traits of the European because they see who is at the bottom. No one comes in and wants to work from the bottom to the top. You want to come in and see who's on the bottom and work away from the bottom. They're not, the Arabs are not coming to live in the slums. They are coming to make money in the slums, you know, in the trap or whatever we want to call it. They want to make their money there, get out. The Chinese, the same. I spoke about that in the first session. So closing here, we're coming up on the madness that we lead into and where mad science has drifted to and where it has drifted. We're going to that. I just had to do the prehistory and lead up to this to give you an understanding on why I'm even talking about this. For one, we have to understand who we're dealing with, mad scientists. Two, we have to see that we're one of their biggest test subjects. We are their guinea pig and have always been since slavery. Since the Jim Crow, not the Jim Crow, the Willie Lynch letter experiments, the Tuskegee experiments, the Hood, the projects, even that is a name of an experiment, the projects, the housing projects, the housing experiments. So we gotta look at these things first before we come up into what I wanna come up to next. Things such as cloning, what they're doing to our foods. So, in closing, family, again, I would advise for any and everyone to follow me and follow the Black Tax Collective at Black Tax Collective on Instagram as well as on Facebook. You can also follow my page on Facebook. It's Latee, Latee. So on Facebook, a page Latee. On Instagram at Black Tax Collective, as well as on Facebook, at Black Tax Collective, which is the organization that is sponsoring all of these talks that we're doing here. So when we come back for the third edition of Mad Science, we'll be jumping into the meat of the lecture, and we finna basically see how these guys are making the sun come out at night and the moon come out in the morning. And that's just a metaphor for what type of sickness that white European science as well as Asian science is drifting towards, and why Africans must remove themselves. And while we're at a beautiful time right now to where we've been involved in their businesses, in their hospitals to get money, as well as general knowledge on how to work equipment. Now it's time to take that equipment knowledge and those economic resources and fund our own for a more righteous approach towards health, towards mental sanity. Because if we don't do it, who will? A BB Fahodie, family.